Are you ready to sew? We're finally to the sewing section of our sew along. This week we're going to be sewing the front and the back together, and then also the sleeves. So we're going to need pieces 1, 2, 3, and then I have 4 at the side. Okay, so I'm taking piece 2, which is the bigger piece, and putting it right sides together with piece 1. You cut out 2 of piece 2, so you just want to make sure that you're picking the right pattern piece that has the double notches, so that when they both have a double notch on them, but you want to pick the one that is going to properly match up right sides together with piece 1. So here I have the double notch, and I pinned all the way down. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and stitch it. I am going to be sewing this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I have a 5/8 inch line here on my sewing machine, and you're going to see that I already have a line on here, but that was because I made a mistake and wasn't recording when I was stitching down. So I'm stitching from the top of my skirt all the way to the bottom. I'm using a size 80/12 universal needle, and my stitch length is 2.5, which is the standard for my sewing machine. And as I go down, you would take the pins out, of course. I put some in here just for looks. And you want to do the 5/8 inch seam allowance the whole way down. And at the end, you want to back stitch to secure your seam. I'm here over at my ironing board, and I want to press my seam open to give it a nice press, and then I'm going to press it to the back. That's just my choice. The pattern directions don't really tell you that, but I'm going to be pressing it open first. I have my iron on a cotton setting, and I'm going to have to put some water in it to give it some more steam, because I really like using steam with cottons. There, it must have a little bit in there. And then I'm going to press it to the back. There isn't really a reason why you should press it to the front or the back. I just like pressing it to the back to start. And then I'm going to take this over to my serger and serge this seam. I'm not going to be showing you those steps just because some of you might not have sergers, but I'm just finishing off that seam with a serge. Next, I'm going to take piece 3, that's the back. And that one was cut on the fold. I'll lay that out with the right side facing up. And it's asking you to pin back to front sections at side seams. So I'm going to be taking the one side that I just sewed the piece 1 and 2 together and put that together over here and pin. Okay, so I have the one side pinned, and then I'm going to take that other piece 2 and lay it right sides together. You want to find the single notch. So here is the single notch. You want to match that up. And that'll tell you how the front and the back pieces go together. And pin down the whole way. we had some small dots on the pattern piece. So we had these little tailor's tacks that I put on the fabric. Now we're going to be using those to mark a little opening. If you look here on your page, it says stitch right side seam, leaving seam open between small dots. So at those small dots where we put the tailor's tacks, that's where we're going to stitch and then stop and then stitch and stop and then start stitching again. The other side, we're going to stitch all the way down. So I'm going to head back over to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew the full straight side seam first, and then I will sew the other side seam that has the stop and start section. That'll be the second one that I do. Okay, so I'm starting with that left side, which is also the side that has the full side seam that we're going to stitch down. I'll back stitch at the beginning to secure the seam and use the 5/8 inch seam allowance the whole way down. All right, now I'm sewing the right side of the dress, and you'll see when I get down to those dots that I put some pins to remind myself to stop, because sometimes you can make all the markings in the world and you forget to stop. All right, I'm coming up to that area that I'm talking about that we're gonna have a space, and I have two pins there. So I'm gonna back stitch and then put my presser foot up and come down to the other pin and back stitch again. You can see that I didn't cut my thread or anything. I'll just go back and do that later. There's nothing that's gonna hurt it by me moving it the way that I did. Now I'm gonna just keep stitching all the way to my hem. Okay, I'm going to take those two pins out from earlier and also the tailor's tacks because I don't need them anymore. I'll take some snips and just cut that thread. Now I'm going to take this over to my serger and serge the seam. This time I'm actually going to serge in single layer, so I'm going to serge the one seam raw edge and then the other seam raw edge because of having that opening, because we're going to be stitching around that on the other side. I'm also going to take this over to my iron and press the seam open. So I'll probably press it open first and then come back over to the serger and serge the seams. And I'll show you what that looks like afterwards. But we'll be back to stitch around that hole that you created. Let me just show you, this is how I finished the raw edges of this side only. I put serge edges down, both raw edges. Here's the opening that you can see. And the reason that I did this is so that when I'm doing the top stitching on the other side, that it's going to lay nice and flat. If you had, if I would have serged this all the way down, well, first of all, I would have closed it up, or I would have had to stop and then start again here. And I just feel like this is a much nicer, cleaner finish. So let me flip it over and we'll do some top stitching. The top stitching that I'm going to do is just about 1/4 inch around it. So I'm going to kind of eyeball the 1/4 inch. You can sort of see my little 1/4 inch dot inside there. I'll back stitch and come all the way down. And then when I get to the end of that opening, I might go past it a stitch or two. turn, put my presser foot up and turn, and then come across to about 1/4 of an inch away from the seam. Okay, I have my needle down again, put my presser foot up, turn the whole thing around, and then come up the other side. And then I'm going to stop again, pivot, and stitch across. I'm going to back stitch to make sure that that seam is nice and secure. So there we have, you can't really see it very well, but I have stitching. You can't see it really well, but I have the openings right here, and I have stitching all the way around it. Let me show you the back side. Here's the back side. You can see the opening, and thankfully I didn't have any of my seams fold over, because that sometimes can be a problem when you can't see what you're doing on the other side. But there we have it. So now what we're going to be doing is putting a hem on both edges of our wrap. Wrap dresses need to have a finished edge because it's literally going to wrap around you rather than sewing 2 seams together. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over to my serger and just serge this raw edge. Then I'm going to take it to my ironing board. I'm going to press it over just the width of the serged stitches, and then I'm going to press it over again to close that seam off. Now, if you don't have a serger or you just want to do it a single fold, you can serge it and then fold it over 5/8 of an inch and then stitch it down with your sewing machine. Or their suggestion is to press it at the 5/8 inch seam allowance, open it back up, and then press your raw edge to meet your 5/8 inch mark, and then press it again. So it's going to create that same double fold that I'm doing with the serger. I'm going to do it with a serger. I think you'll get the idea of how you should do it if you don't have a serger, but it's the same process. Okay, so here is my one raw edge. I have the wrong side facing up, and before I start folding it, I'm going to just give my serged edge a nice press. It kind of flattens it out and makes sure that any puckering that could have happened is eliminated now. Then I'm going to take that serged edge and fold it over just the width of my serged stitches and press all the way down. I'm going to fold that edge over again, making sure that I'm keeping it pretty even. And there, so that's what we're going to take over to the sewing machine and stitch down. Like I said earlier, I like to stitch from the top of my dress all the way down to the hem, just for consistency's sake and keeping anything really straight and even. Now I'm going to turn the wrap to the other side. This is really big. And now up here is where my hem is. I'm going to press that I'm going to press that serge seam again. Trim my little tail. Press down the serged edge. Once, and then fold it over again. Okay. I'm going to head back over to the sewing machine and top stitch both edges of my wrap dress. All right, my top stitching is still going to be at that 2.5 stitch length. I am doing the top stitching from the wrong side so that I know that I'm catching the seam here. I'm also just going to take my time because I want this to look really nice. It's approximately a 1/4 inch seam allowance we'll lay down. Okay, so that's the one side done. You probably barely see it, but there's my top stitching. I picked a pretty good color thread. Now this time I'm going to be sewing from the hem up. I know that goes against my rules, but it's a lot harder to stitch for me doing it the opposite direction. I have a pretty good eye for doing this kind of fast, so if you don't, take your time. Okay, so this week we're going to be working on the sleeves. That would be steps 5 through 11. I'm going to be doing it slightly out of order just for a streamlining sake, and I think it would be totally okay for you to do that too. So the original instructions say that you should be stitching the underarm seam section first, and then you're pressing the lower edge up. I always find that it's a whole lot easier to press something when it's in the flat state than when it's in the round. I mean, you definitely can do it. That's not an issue. It's just, I like to press something when it's flat. So here you can see our line that we had drawn on there because of the fold line marking on your pattern. But if I measure that, it's 1 1/4 inches. So I could technically just take this over to the iron and fold up 1 1/4 inches and mark it as I go with my measuring tool rather than having the marking there. So I'm going to do it that way for both of these, just for the sake of ease. I find it a little bit easier. Now, on your instructions on step 7, it says to form casing for elastic, turn under 1/4 inch on raw edge and stitch into place, leaving an opening to insert elastic. So what you're going to do is also fold up about 1/4 inch on that raw edge first, and then fold up along that placement line, which is going to end up being about 1 inch. So you can do it where you do the 1/4 inch first and then the 1 inch, or you can do the whole 1 1/4 inch and then go back and fold that under. But that's going to be creating that casing that we'll use later, and we're going to stitch that down. So I'm just expediting things a little bit, doing more of the pressing sections together, and then we'll go to the sewing machine and sew the actual sleeve together in the round and then create the casing. So I have my fabric facing wrong side up, and I'm going to take my handy tool here. This is a from Clover. It's a 5-in-1 gauge. I'm going to slide this down to the 1 1/4 inch mark and bring that up and press. Okay, so that's my 1 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to open it back up and do that 1/4 inch. As I mentioned before, you can do it the 1/4 inch first and then the 1 inch, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm going to just eyeball this 1/4 inch. When you do this though, you want to make sure that you're not pressing onto that folded area that you just did. because then you're taking your press out, and that's no fun. And don't worry, when we do the stitching of our sleeve seam, the pressing's not going to go away. Okay. There we go. So that is all pressed up. And we're going to do that for the other sleeve as well. And then we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and stitch it. Now I'm taking it back, unfolding it, but I'm not pressing out my fold or anything. I'm taking my raw edges of my sleeve seam and pinning those together. And this should really help you later on when you're putting that the next step together. It should be a whole lot easier rather than having to press something in the round. So we're going to do a 5/8 inch seam allowance along that seam. Okay, so this is my seam of my sleeve. I'm going to start in back stitch and then come all the way down using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Just remember to still have that area where you pressed opened up. So I'm going to take this over to the iron and press the seam open. Then I'm going to take it back to the serger and stitch it closed to get with the raw edges together. So you could press it towards the back at that point. And I'm going to repeat for the other sleeve. All right, so this is my serged off sleeve seam, and I folded up along the placement line at that 1 1/4 inch. I folded that up, and now I'm going to fold under that 1/4 inch piece and just start pinning. And I'm going to do that the whole way around. It should go down pretty nicely because you already pressed the 1/4 inch, and if it doesn't, sometimes I like to put it over something like a sleeve board or maybe the sewing machine here, and that can help give you a flat surface to hold it down as well. But I was doing okay, just doing it kind of in the air here. So now I'm going to start my stitching at the seam. And I'm going to stitch this whole thing into place. I'm going to go kind of near the edge here, and then I'm going to go around again a 1/2 inch away from the edge. As you approach the seam, you're going to make sure to leave a space because you want to make sure that you can put your elastic in. So I'm going to leave about a 1 inch space and just back stitch there to get that seam nice and, or to make sure that your seam isn't going to come apart. Now, the directions say then you're going to stitch again 1/2 inch from the turned under edge, which is this edge here, and that's going to create a ruffle. But that time you're going to go all the way around. You're not going to be leaving an opening. So 1/2 inch would be here. So it's important to note when you're doing your first set of stitches to be close to the edge of your folded edge on this side, because you want to make sure that you have at least 1/4 inch, or you want to actually have a good 3/8 inch opening here for your elastic to go through. Now this here is going to be the ruffle, so you won't be inserting any elastic there, and that's why we ended up just stitching right through. So you're going to do that again for your other sleeve. All right, so now it's time to fish the elastic through our casing. So I like to take a safety pin. You don't want to use a too wide of a safety pin end, because then it won't fit through your casing. And I feed it onto the elastic just like that. I'm going to find my opening and feed it all the way through. Now, as you're feeding it all the way through, you want to try to make sure that you're not twisting the elastic as you go. It's very important. And you can kind of feel it as you go around, whether it's flat or not. So this is a really gathered sleeve. So I'm going to take the end of my elastic and pin it onto the sleeve here, because as I go around, I don't want to lose the elastic in the casing. That would really be unfortunate. Because right here you can see, like, I'm already at the end and I still have about halfway to go. So this is a very ruffly sleeve. So creating such a pretty little ruffle too. Okay, so I'm back at the end. I'm going to take the safety pin off, and I'm just going to pin this on here just temporarily and stretch this out so that the gathers get kind of nice and even. So now I'm going to take both of these pins off very carefully. I'm going to pull out enough that I can overlap the two edges. I'm just going to pin that for a second because I want to show you something that I kind of learned recently. There's a notion called Wash Away Wonder Tape. It's something that we carry on our website, and I'm going to open it up. And it's something that you use to position zippers, pockets, any other item, rather than using pins, because sometimes pins can be really fumbly, especially in small areas such as this elastic. So it's a tape. I'm going to find the end here. Okay. There. It's a double-sided tape. I'm just going to rip off this edge here to get started. It's a double-sided tape that I like to just cut a little piece, like nothing more than an inch. So I like to take the one piece of elastic and push the tape onto it really good. And then you want to peel off the paper backing, making sure that the tape is still sticking to your elastic. Then overlap the other one, and you're just overlapping at approximately 1/2 of an inch, and it should stay there till you get over to your sewing machine to stitch the two pieces of elastic together. Now, when you're stitching the elastic together, you can go in a box or you can do a zigzag. I'm going to do a zigzag because it's just a little bit easier for me. Make sure that the elastic is laying flat under there. This can be a little tricky because you're working in a really small section. I'm going to change my sewing machine to just a basic zigzag and stitch along that 1/2 of an inch. There, that should keep it nice and secure. Then you can re-stretch out your sleeve, and you want to close up that hole. So find where the opening is and, oops, take it back to straight stitch, of course. And you're going to want to pull on it like this as you stitch, and then back stitch. Okay, so there we have the first sleeve done. We have a nice little ruffle on here, and we're going to repeat that for the second sleeve. Okay, so now that we're done with the sleeves, we're going to sew the sleeves onto this dress. You want to look for the very rounded curve of your pattern piece. It's kind of hard to find because you're dealing with a lot of kind of square footage here. But you want to look for the most rounded edge, and it's going to have notches. So this is the double notch, and here is the single notch. So you want to take the sleeve piece that's going to match up with that, which is not that one. Here we go. When it's right sides together, you should have a single notch on one side of your sleeve and a double notch on the other side. You also want to line up your seam, your underarm seam. And I like to do that first before anything, because then it's going to help give you hopefully a nice meat in the middle. And then I'm going to bring it around to the edge. And then I have it lined up here and at the seam. I'm just going to kind of ease it into that hole. It's a pretty curvy edge there. Then I'm going to repeat on the back side here. Match my end. And then ease them into each other. We're going to do the same on the other side and then stitch all the way from one edge of the curve to the other. Now on the other side, this is where I have a single, where I have the seam pressed open. Make sure that it stays pressed open. We're going to stitch the sleeve to the dress with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. As I'm sewing, because I'm sewing on such a deep curve, I'm pulling literally with my left hand on the top fabric and then just making sure that the bottom fabric is laying nice and straight. Because it's just quite an interesting angle. Again, I'm doing the same thing. You also have a lot of fabric to get out of the way. Stitch at the end. Okay, so then you're going to repeat this on the other side, but the directions are saying to clip along your seam allowance the front and the back armhole just above the notches.